Thank you very much for visiting my channel. If not difficult, like and subscribe to my channel to always be aware of events. Thank. What a surprise. Little more than 12 hours after Russia signed a UN-authorized deal with Ukraine to lift the blockade of vitally needed grain exports, in which each side agreed not to undertake any attacks against port facilities engaged in this initiative, 4 of Moscow's Kalibr cruise missiles were launched at Odessa. 2 penetrated the air defenses of Ukraine's key southern port, slamming into the harbor. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, declared that the attack demonstrated the Kremlin's disregard for the safety and security of millions of civilians. Our own Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, said, "It shows that not a word the Russian president says can be trusted." Both these statements are accurate, but they add nothing to what we already knew. Russia may be a member of the UN Security Council, but it is also a bandit nation, and one should never negotiate with bandits, or not with the expectation that they would honor any agreement. We might go further and say that, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, Russia has become a terrorist state. This argument was recently set out by Anne Applebaum, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of a book, Red Famine, on the mass starvation of millions of Ukrainians as an act of policy by Moscow in the 1930s. She has been in Ukraine and has observed how Russia is directing constant, repetitive, visible terrorist violence against civilians, many of whom are nowhere near the fighting. She also points out that, following the revelations of the torture and massacre of hundreds of civilians in Bucha, Putin awarded medals to the brigade that had committed most of the atrocities. The witness accounts of the depravities committed in Bucha, which emerged in April after the Russians pulled out from that suburb near the capital Kyiv, made a profound impression. They were significant in hardening Western resolve to increase the supply of weapons to the Ukrainians, to prevent further centers of population falling prey to barbarism of this sort. But sometimes it is the brutal extinguishing of a single life rather than the slaughter of many that makes the biggest impression, and most clearly brings home the human cost of terrorism, which is simultaneously random and deliberate. That was the effect on me, on learning about the death of Liza Dmitrieva on July 14 in Vinnytsia. On that day, Russia fired 7 missiles at this western Ukrainian city, fully 250 miles from the front line of the conflict, and posing no threat whatsoever to the Russian forces in the east of this vast country. One of the guided missiles hit the city's medical center. The 23 victims included a neurologist, Natalia Falshtinska, a mother of 3, who was working there at the time. Liza Dmitrieva was killed on her walk home back from the center, where she had gone for speech therapy. She was 4 years old and had Down syndrome. Her mother, Irina, had her leg blown off in the missile strike, and remains in a critical condition. But what tears at the heart is the contents of the phone carried by Irina and rescued from the site. It had the video she took of Liza only minutes earlier, in which the little girl is talking merrily to her mother, while pushing her own pram, a pram in which she no longer needed to spend much time as she had grown sufficiently strong. I suppose I was most affected because I am the father of a young woman with Down syndrome, and understand how, as a parent, such vulnerability makes one feel so protective, almost painfully so. Irina had been overwhelmingly devoted to her daughter and chronicled her life through social media. She revealed how, when her daughter's condition was detected during the pregnancy, she was told by the medical staff, "You are young. Why do you need a sick child?" But she and her partner ignored the advice to terminate the pregnancy, as she put it, to show Liza the world. At 7 months, Baby Liza underwent heart surgery, and Irina described watching how our girl was taken out of the operating room and transferred to intensive care. Covered in wires, drips. So small and defenseless.